every day while everyone looked away, until a soldier stopped and changed everything. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. The first rays of the morning sun came not as comfort, but as a sharp, relentless glare upon the cracked earth, a dry wind scraping over the barren ground with each restless whisper that rattled the thin wooden walls of the hut where Moloch lay half awake, eyes staring at the ceiling patched with cardboard and scraps of tin. The scent of warm dust and old smoke lived in that air, a scent that clung to everything and marked the morning as the same as every other before it, a morning that promised no miracles and offered no escape, only the persistent demand to rise, to move, to endure. His thin arms pushed himself up from the ragged mat, the coarse fibers pressing lines into his elbows as he shifted and looked across the room to where his little sister Anya lay curled beneath a faded sheet. Her breathing was shallow, chest barely rising, and her small hands twitched now and then, as if grasping for something even in sleep. Her hair, dark and matted, fell across her face, and Moloch reached out to gently brush it aside, revealing the hollow lines of her cheeks and the soft curve of her closed eyelids. For a moment, he watched her, waiting to see if she would open her eyes, but she only coughed lightly, a dry sound that seemed to echo too loudly in the quiet of the dawn. Outside, the world was already warming, the sand-colored light falling across the dirt yard where the old water barrel stood, with its warped sides and rust stains marking the places where rain had once dripped in. Moloch tied the worn rope around the rough bundle of branches and twigs he had gathered the day before, the fibers biting into his fingers, leaving grooves where dirt and sweat already settled. His feet were bare, the soles calloused from years of walking these roads, and he wrapped thin strips of torn cloth around them to keep the hot dust from burning through as he walked. When he stepped out, the breeze caught the edge of his torn shirt, flapping it against his thin frame, the cloth already stiff with old sweat. The road ahead stretched out like a ribbon of pale clay, littered with small stones that cut into his feet as he adjusted the weight of the bundle on his back, the ends of the branches poking over his shoulder, scratching his neck as he took his first steps away from the hut, away from Anya's small, frail body lying alone in the dark. The world was silent in that early hour, except for the sighing of the wind, carrying with it the dust that coated everything in a thin film of grit. Moloch's eyes burned as the breeze pushed tiny grains into them, and he blinked, wiping the tears away with the back of his hand, leaving streaks of dirt on his cheeks. The road was empty, though here and there a curtain would twitch in a window, a shape shifting behind thin glass, eyes watching him for a moment before turning away, disappearing back into the shadows of their homes. As he passed by the old billboard near the corner, its colors faded to near white, Moloch looked up at the words peeling under the sun. Freedom for all, prosperity for all. The edges of the poster flapped softly in the breeze, and the image of the smiling family on it was cracked and torn, a ghost of a promise that never reached the end of this street. Moloch's eyes lingered for a breath, then dropped again to the dirt in front of his feet, counting each step, focusing on the way his toes spread across the warm ground, how the dust puffed up and settled around his ankles as he walked. The path to the dry creek was familiar, winding past abandoned houses where roofs had collapsed inward, leaving piles of sun-bleached timber and rusted nails, the air sharp with the smell of dry earth. It was there he found the scattered branches, brittle and pale, scattered among rocks and weeds. Moloch set down the bundle and began to gather more, searching under the low shrubs and between the stones for anything that could burn, anything that could be added to the collection to trade for water or a small handful of flour. Each stick was examined, tested to see if it would snap easily to ensure it was dry enough to burn. His fingers became scratched and splintered, blood rising in tiny pinpricks before drying under the heat, the pain ignored as he moved from one bush to the next, his eyes scanning the ground with the sharpness of someone who could not afford to miss even the smallest piece of wood. The sun rose higher, its warmth turning harsh, and sweat trickled down his spine, soaking into the waistband of his shorts, darkening the cloth as it spread. When the bundle was heavy enough to press down on his shoulders, Malik tied it again with the rope, double knots to keep it from spilling as he lifted it onto his back. The strain made him pause, knees bending, slightly under the weight, but he clenched his teeth and adjusted the rope across his chest, taking a deep breath before moving once more toward home, the sun now blazing in the sky, turning the dirt beneath him hot enough to burn through the thin cloth around his feet. The town felt empty as he passed back through the narrow streets, the windows dark, the doors shut, though he could feel eyes on him, watching through cracks, observing the slow progress of a boy with too much weight on his shoulders. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence, and its voice echoing through the quiet, and Malik's heart jumped before settling again as he pressed on, dust rising around his ankles in soft clouds with each step. Reaching the hut, he stopped to catch his breath, the bundle sliding from his shoulders with a dull thud against the ground. The air inside was cooler, the shadows deep and long as the sun passed over the roof. Anya was awake now, her eyes open and glassy as she watched him enter. A soft cough escaping her lips, her hand moving slightly as if to greet him, though she did not speak. Malik gave her a small nod, setting the bundle near the fireplace, pulling apart the driest twigs for kindling as he placed them carefully in the pit. The water he poured into the battered pot was cloudy, small bits of dirt swirling before settling as he stirred it with a stick, watching the thin film on top break apart. The fire took time to catch, the kindling refusing to burn at first before finally giving in, smoke curling upward in thin gray lines that stung his eyes and made him blink rapidly, tears clearing the dust from his lashes for a moment. The heat was comforting despite the warmth of the day, a sign of something living, something that promised even a meager meal. As the water warmed, Malik glanced at Ania, who had turned her face toward the warmth, eyes half closed, a faint smile on her cracked lips. She was so small, he thought, remembering the way their mother used to brush Ania's hair, her fingers moving gently, singing softly under her breath as she worked. That song was gone now, the voice silenced by a sun that took more than it ever gave, by a town that turned its back, by a system that left them alone to fight for every drop of water, every crumb of food. When the water boiled, he added a small handful of crushed cornmeal, stirring it slowly, careful not to spill, the mixture thickening with each pass of the stick. The smell was faint, but it was enough to bring Ania's eyes open again, her head lifting slightly as she watched the steam rising from the pot. Malik smiled at her, a tired, weary curve of his lips, and carefully spooned some of the porridge into a cracked bowl, letting it cool before bringing it to her. Her hands shook as she reached for it, and he helped her hold the bowl, guiding it to her lips as she sipped, the hot mixture leaving a thin line down her chin as she swallowed, her eyes closing with each careful taste. Malik wiped the line away with the edge of his sleeve, holding the bowl steady until she had finished, her breathing soft as she rested back, the bowl empty but for the thin traces of porridge clinging to the sides. Outside, the sky was turning the color of copper, the light slanting through the doorway, catching the dust in golden streaks that floated lazily in the warm air. Malik set the bowl aside, rinsing it with a small splash of water from the barrel before returning to his place near Anya. Sitting down on the floor, knees pulled to his chest as he watched the light fade. Night came quietly, the stars appearing one by one in the gaps of the roof where the boards didn't quite meet, tiny points of white in the darkness. Malik lay down on his mat, listening to Anya's breathing, the soft rustle of the wind through the dry grass outside, the distant sound of laughter from the houses that still had lights in their windows, families gathering for dinners he could only imagine. His stomach twisted with hunger, but he closed his eyes and willed himself to sleep, knowing that tomorrow he would need to wake early again, that tomorrow he would need to find more branches, to walk the roads under the sun, to keep moving, to keep fighting for the sister who depended on him. His dreams were filled with the sound of footsteps on dry dirt, of the soft creak of the rope across his chest, of the endless road stretching out before him, dust rising with each step, the sun overhead a constant, merciless eye. In those dreams he saw the billboard again, the words flaking away, the promise of freedom just beyond reach. And he woke in the darkness, the sound of Anya's breathing steady beside him, the warmth of the small fire's embers glowing in the ashes, a faint light in the night reminding him that dawn would come, that the road would still be there, waiting. The dawn crept in with a sharpness that felt almost cruel, a pale light brushing across the cracks in the clay walls and waking. Malik, before the world itself seemed ready to move. The air was heavy, warm even before the sun had risen fully, and he could feel the heat of the coming day waiting beyond the thin wood of the door. For a moment he lay still, listening to the soft breathing of Anya beside him, her small body curled beneath the frayed sheet, her chest rising and falling in shallow, measured breaths that seemed to count out the moments in the dark. His own body ached, the dull pain in his legs a reminder of the miles he had walked the day before, the weight of the bundle digging into his shoulders long after he had set it down. His fingers flexed unconsciously, the skin cracked and raw around the nails, dirt embedded in the lines of his palms from where he had gathered the branches and pulled them along the rough roads. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his wrist, pushing away the blur of sleep and the sting of tears that had dried there in the night. The fire in the small pit near the door had long gone cold, leaving only a scattering of ashes that he stirred with a stick, watching the gray dust rise and settle again, lifeless. Malik pushed himself up, moving quietly so as not to wake Ania, and stepped out into the early morning, the air already carrying the dry scent of dust and warm earth. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with the last hints of night, and the wind was gentle, brushing against his skin as he stepped into the yard, his feet bare, pressing into the cool dirt that would soon burn under the heat of the sun. He tied the thin strips of cloth around his feet, pulling them tight to cover the soles that were already rough with old scars, the fabric providing little protection but enough to keep the worst of the heat from burning through. The bundle of rope lay coiled near the doorway, waiting for him, and he picked it up, wrapping it around his wrist before setting off down the narrow path that led away from the hut, away from Ania, who remained behind with only the silence for company. The road was quiet, the dust rising in small puffs with each step, clinging to his legs, turning the skin a pale brown that darkened with sweat as he walked. He passed by the empty fields, the ground cracked and dry, weeds pushing up between the lines of dirt where crops once grew, the remnants of plants long dead bending in the breeze, like brittle fingers reaching for water that would never come. The houses he passed were silent, doors closed, windows dark, though he could feel the weight of eyes watching from behind curtains, a flicker of movement here and there as people pulled back, turning away rather than meeting his gaze. Ahead, the shape of the school came into view, the low building with its faded paint and broken fence, the yard littered with scraps of paper and bits of plastic that rustled when the wind caught them. Children in cleaner clothes and shoes with thick soles moved through the gate, their voices rising in laughter that carried across the empty space between them and Malik as he passed by on the other side of the road. Some of them turned to look at him, their eyes bright and curious, but their parents pulled them away, voices low, hands tightening around small shoulders as they were guided inside. Malik kept his eyes on the ground, the weight of their stares pressing on him as heavily as the bundle would later. His heart thudding in his chest as he moved past, each step measured, each breath careful, not wanting to give them a reason to look longer, to say something, to remind him of what he already knew. He was not welcome there, not in their classrooms, not in their games, not in the world that seemed so close he could almost touch it, yet so far that he would never reach it, no matter how many steps he took. He turned away from the road leading to the school, moving toward the area near the edge of town where the trees grew in scattered clusters, the ground littered with fallen branches and dead wood that had been left to dry under the relentless sun. The wind here was sharper, carrying the scent of dry grass and the faint sweetness of the leaves that clung stubbornly to the branches, rustling softly overhead. Malik began to gather the wood, testing each piece to see if it would break cleanly, shaking off the dirt and insects before adding it to the growing pile at his feet. His hands worked quickly, fingers closing around the rough edges of the wood, pulling them free from the undergrowth, ignoring the small cuts and scrapes that opened along his skin, the blood that dried quickly under the heat. Each piece of wood was precious, each stick a small promise of water, of food, of something to bring back to Anya, who would be waiting in the dark with her hollow eyes and quiet breath, hoping for the taste of porridge, for the feel of warmth in her hands. As the sun climbed higher, the light turned harsh, beating down on the back of Malik's neck, the sweat soaking through his shirt, dripping from his hair into his eyes, making him blink against the sting. The pile grew slowly, each addition heavier than the last, the rope ready to bind them together, to hold them as he pulled them across the ground, each step digging into the dirt as he leaned forward, his body straining under the weight. Once the bundle was complete, tied tightly with the rope, Malik bent his knees and lifted, the strain pulling at the muscles in his back, the rope biting into his shoulders as he shifted the weight to balance it, testing each movement before taking the first step back toward the town. The heat rose in waves from the ground, distorting the air, making the road ahead shimmer as if it were underwater, the horizon bending in the glare of the sun. His feet moved slowly, the rough ground pressing into the thin cloth, the rocks sharp under the soles, sending jolts of pain through his legs with each step. The sweat dried on his skin, leaving lines of salt that itched as he moved, the dust sticking to him, turning him into part of the road, blending him into the earth as he dragged the bundle behind him, the branches scraping against the dirt, leaving a trail that marked his passage through the empty streets. As he neared the center of town, the houses became closer together, the shadows shorter under the harsh midday sun, and the people began to appear, moving along the edges of the road, carrying baskets, pulling carts, their eyes sliding over Malik as if he were invisible, as if the bundle of wood and the strain in his steps did not exist. A man passed with his son, the child glancing back at Malik, wide-eyed, before his father's hand turned his head away, guiding him forward with a wordless command that needed no explanation. Malek's throat was dry, the air thick and heavy in his lungs, each breath an effort as he pulled the bundle up a small incline, the rope cutting into his palms, the rough fibers leaving marks that joined the scars from the days before. His stomach ached with hunger, the emptiness a constant companion, twisting and pulling inside him with each movement, reminding him of the meal he had skipped to leave enough for Anya, the meal he would skip again today if the bundle did not fetch enough water or food. He reached the small open area near the market, where stalls were being set up, the vendors arranging their goods under makeshift canopies that offered a thin shield from the sun. The scent of vegetables and warm bread drifted on the air, mixed with the sharper smells of sweat and dust, the occasional sharp tang of metal from the tools and utensils laid out for sale. Malek set the bundle down, the weight leaving him in a sudden rush that made him stagger, his knees almost giving way as he caught himself, steadying his breath before sitting beside it, letting the heat wash over him as he wiped the sweat from his face with the back of his arm. He watched as people moved around him, stepping carefully to avoid the bundle, their eyes never meeting his, their conversations continuing as if he were not there, as if the space he occupied was empty. A woman with a basket of fruit stepped around him, lifting her skirt slightly to avoid the dust, her eyes flicking to the bundle before moving past, her face unreadable in the glare of the sun. Malek remained still, waiting, hoping that someone would stop, that someone would see the wood and remember the cold nights, the way the wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, the way the darkness pressed close without the light of a fire. He waited, but the people moved on, their shadows passing over him without pause, without acknowledgement, as if he were a part of the ground, as if the bundle of wood was nothing more than another piece of debris left in the road. When the afternoon began to stretch toward evening, the sun lowering just enough to take the edge off the heat, Malek lifted the bundle once more, the rope pressing into his shoulders as he pulled it along the road toward home, each step heavy, each breath measured, his eyes on the ground as he moved past the houses where lights were beginning to glow in the windows, where families were gathering for meals he would never see. His feet were raw, the cloth around them torn and dirty, the dust clinging to the sweat that still covered his skin, turning him into a shadow as he passed through the streets, the world around him shifting into darkness as the sun fell below the horizon. The bundle dragged behind him, the wood knocking softly against the ground with each step, a dull, steady sound that marked his progress, that kept him company in the silence of the evening. When he reached the hut, the sky was dark, the stars beginning to appear in the gaps between the clouds, the air cooler now but still heavy with the heat of the day. Anya was awake, her eyes reflecting the small light from the lamp that flickered near the doorway, her hand lifting weakly as she saw him enter, the faintest of smiles, on her lips as he set the bundle down, the wood rattling softly as it settled. Malek sat beside her, his body aching, his stomach empty, but the sight of her eyes, the small comfort in her smile, was enough to ease the weight for a moment. He reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the thinness of her fingers, the warmth of her skin under his dirt-stained palm. And for a moment, the world was quiet. The darkness outside held at bay by the small light that glowed in the corner, the promise of another day waiting in the silence. He closed his eyes, resting his head against the wall, listening to the sound of her breathing, the quiet of the night, the soft rustle of the wind outside. Tomorrow, he knew, he would rise again. He would gather the branches, he would walk the roads, he would carry the weight that no one else would see, that no one else would help him bear. Tomorrow the sun would rise, the dust would rise, and Malek would rise with it, each step carrying him forward, each breath a promise he would keep, no matter how heavy the road became. The morning came heavy and slow, the heat pressing against the thin walls of the hut before the sun had even cleared the low horizon. Malik felt the weight of it before he opened his eyes, a suffocating thickness in the air that made each breath feel like an effort, each movement a struggle. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the dawn, the rustle of dry leaves outside, the distant bray of a donkey somewhere in the village, the soft rasp of Anaya's breathing as she stirred on her mat beside him. Her breathing was harsher now, a wheeze threading through each inhale, her small hand clutching at the blanket as she tried to push herself upright. Malik moved quickly to help her, slipping an arm around her thin shoulders, guiding her to sit, propping her against the wall where the cracked clay let in thin lines of dusty light. Her eyes found his, dark and tired, but a faint smile pulled at the corners of her dry lips as she looked up at him, and for a moment the heaviness in Malik's chest eased, replaced by something warm that hurt in a different way. He poured the last of their water into a small tin cup, the liquid cloudy, speckled with dust despite the cloth he had used to strain it the night before. Ania's fingers were trembling as she reached for it, and Malik steadied her hand, guiding the cup to her lips, watching as she drank in small, careful sips, her eyes closing as she swallowed. She coughed after, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to fill the small room, and Malik's hand tightened around the cup, holding it steady until she finished, until she sank back against the wall, her breathing calming once more. Outside, the light was sharpening, turning the dust in the air into a golden haze that shifted with each breath of wind. Malik tied the strips of cloth around his feet again, pulling them tight, ignoring the sting where the fabric pressed against the sores and blisters that covered the soles of his feet. He checked the small pile of drier branches near the door, counting them with a quick glance before picking up the rope, wrapping it around his wrist, the rough fibers digging into his skin, grounding him in the moment. Anya watched him, her eyes following his movements, and Malik paused, looking back at her, giving her a small nod that he hoped was reassuring, a promise that he would return, that he would bring back something, anything, that might ease the tightness in her chest, the dryness in her throat. She didn't speak, but her lips moved, shaping the words without sound, and Malik felt them settle in the air between them, a quiet bond that tied them together even as he stepped out into the brightness of the morning. The heat struck him immediately, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket, the light so bright it made him squint, blinking against the glare as he adjusted the bundle of wood across his back, the rope digging into his shoulders as he shifted the weight. The road ahead was already shimmering with the promise of heat, the dust rising in tiny clouds with each step, clinging to his skin, turning the sweat that trickled down his back into thin, dirty lines that dried almost as soon as they formed. As he walked, the village began to wake around him, doors opening to release the cooler air trapped inside. People stepping out, pulling water from the few working pumps, carrying buckets to their homes. Malik passed them, his eyes on the ground, feeling the weight of their glances, the way they turned away quickly, pretending not to see him, pretending not to notice the bundle on his back, the tired slump of his shoulders, the dust that clung to his skin and hair. He moved toward the center of the village, where the market stalls were beginning to open, where the smells of bread and roasting maize drifted through the air, mixing with the sharper scents of sweat and dust and the faint metallic tang of old coins. The sounds of voices rose around him, laughter and bartering, The calls of vendors advertising their goods, the clink of coins changing hands, all blended into a hum that seemed to press in on Malik as he approached, the weight of the bundle pulling at his shoulders with each step. He stopped at the edge of the market, setting the bundle down carefully, the wood rattling softly as it settled, sending up a small puff of dust that caught the light, dancing in the air for a moment before falling back to the ground. Malik straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders, feeling the ache in his muscles, the way his arms trembled with the effort of holding the weight for so long. He wiped the sweat from his face with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his cheek, and looked around, searching for someone, anyone, who might be willing to trade. He approached the first stall, a woman selling water in old plastic bottles, the clear liquid catching the light, looking impossibly clean, impossibly cool. Malik lifted his bundle slightly, showing her the wood, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before she looked away, shaking her head, her lips tightening as she turned to arrange her bottles, her hands moving quickly, deliberately ignoring the boy standing in front of her. Malik moved to the next stall and the next, each step a little heavier, each refusal a little sharper, the quiet rejection of his presence pressing against him, pushing him down with every glance that slid away, every head that turned, every shoulder that moved to block his view. His throat was dry, his tongue sticking to the roof of his mouth as he swallowed, the taste of dust thick and bitter, the air hot in his lungs as he tried to speak, to ask, to offer, but the words felt heavy, falling from his lips in whispers that no one seemed to hear. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a shimmering wave of heat that bent the light, making the edges of the stalls waver as Malik moved between them, the bundle on his back feeling heavier with each passing moment, the rope cutting into his shoulders, his hands shaking as he held it, showing it, offering it, hoping for something, anything in return. His feet dragged, the thin cloth around them now torn and dirty, the sores on his soles burning with each step, each movement sending a sharp, bright pain up his legs that made him wince, made him pause, but he kept moving, kept trying, because he had to, because Ania was waiting. As the afternoon wore on, the heat pressed down like a hand, pushing the air into Malik's lungs, making it hard to breathe, making the world blur at the edges as he moved. His vision swam, the light bright and sharp, stabbing into his eyes, forcing him to blink, to wipe at the tears that gathered, that mixed with the sweat on his cheeks, leaving salty trails that dried almost immediately in the heat. The sounds around him became distant, muffled, the laughter and voices fading into a low hum that buzzed in his ears, matching the pounding of his heart, the steady, insistent throb that filled his head with each beat. He moved toward a quieter corner of the market, hoping to find someone who might take pity, who might trade even a small cup of water for the bundle he had dragged through the dust and heat. His legs trembled as he stopped, setting the bundle down once more, the wood clattering softly, sending up another puff of dust that caught the light, turning golden for a moment before settling back to the ground. Malik leaned against the wall, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps, his eyes closing as he tried to steady himself, to calm the shaking in his hands, the weakness in his knees. A group of boys about his age approached, their laughter sharp and bright in the heavy air, their clothes clean, their feet shod in shoes that left neat prints in the dust. They stopped near him, their eyes sliding over the bundle, over Malik, lingering for a moment before one of them stepped forward, his foot kicking at the bundle, sending a piece of wood rolling away, bumping against Malik's foot. The boy laughed, a quick, sharp sound that cut through the air, and the others joined in, their voices ringing in Malek's ears as he bent to pick up the fallen piece, his fingers closing around the rough wood, holding it close to his chest. Another boy stepped forward, bending as if to help, his hand reaching for the wood before snatching it away, throwing it back at Malek, the piece striking him in the chest before falling to the ground. The laughter rose again, bright and loud, echoing in the quiet corner of the market, the sound sharp in the heat, in the silence that followed as the boys turned away, leaving Malek standing there, his hands shaking, the piece of wood pressed against his chest, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He crouched, gathering the scattered pieces, his fingers trembling as he picked them up, placing them carefully back into the bundle, tying the rope once more, each knot pulled tight with hands that shook, with fingers that bled from small cuts and scrapes. The world tilted around him, the edges of his vision darkening, narrowing, the light turning into sharp, bright points that stabbed into his eyes as he blinked, trying to clear the blur, trying to steady himself. When he stood, the world swayed, the ground shifting beneath his feet, the heat pressing in, wrapping around him, suffocating him as his breath caught, as his knees buckled, as the rope slipped from his fingers, the bundle falling to the ground with a dull thud. Malek fell with it, his body hitting the dirt, the breath knocked from his lungs as he lay there, the dust rising around him, settling on his skin, sticking to the sweat that covered him, turning him into part of the road, part of the ground, part of the silence that filled the air as the world moved on around him. People stepped around him, their feet careful not to touch him, their eyes sliding away, pretending not to see the boy lying in the dust, the boy with the bundle of wood, the boy whose chest rose and fell in shallow, strained breaths as the heat pressed down, as the sun burned in the sky above, as the world moved on, leaving him there, unseen, unheard, alone. Heat shimmered over the dirt road, thick and wavering, as the boy lay face down in the dust beside the market's busiest path. The world moved around him in shifting feet and rustling fabric, the low hum of voices rising and falling like a tide that ignored him, stepping around the small, unmoving shape with the bundle of wood spilled like broken bones across the ground. The sun pressed hard against the earth, forcing every scent of sweat, soil, and stale air to cling, the heat so complete that even the flies circling Malek's limp hand seemed sluggish, their wings slow in the heavy air. The dirt clung to the sweat on his cheeks, streaking in lines across the dark skin of his face, gathering in the corners of his mouth. His lips, dry and cracked, moved faintly as he pulled in shallow breaths, each breath stirring the dust beneath his nose, leaving the smallest trace of life in the dirt that had become his bed. Around him, shoes passed, scuffed sandals, boots with worn soles, the soft brush of skirts and the slap of children's bare feet as they were pulled quickly along by hands that would not let them stop. "Don't look," came the soft warnings, the quiet hisses of caution from parents to children, turning heads, quickening steps. "Don't look at him. Just keep walking." Someone laughed, loud and sharp at something unrelated, and the sound passed over Malek's back like a slap he could not feel. The wood he had gathered lay scattered in a fan around him. Some of the pieces cracked, others rolling away to bump gently against passing ankles, only to be kicked aside with careless nudges that sent them skittering across the packed dirt to rest against market stalls. Each bump, each scrape of wood against stone, was a reminder of what he had carried, what he had tried to trade for water and food, what he had failed to keep. A shadow moved across him, pausing, and for a moment, Malek felt the coolness of it on his burning skin, a small relief that passed as quickly as it came. The market did not stop. No one called for help. No one lifted him or offered water or shade or a hand. The breeze came, stirring the air, lifting a thin swirl of dust that settled across Malik's back, collecting in the torn cloth of his shirt, the fabric, stiff with sweat and dirt, turning darker where it pressed against his thin frame. He did not see the truck when it first arrived, did not see how it rattled the quiet edges of the market, how heads turned sharply at the sound of its horn, how people stepped back from its path as it rolled to a stop near the edge of the square. The engine cut off, leaving a heavy silence in its place, the kind that made the clatter of the market seem suddenly loud, the calls of vendors sharp and the laughter of children brittle, unnatural. The door opened, and boots hit the ground with a solid thud. The figure that stepped out standing taller than most, his shoulders broad beneath the heavy coat he wore despite the heat. His skin was pale beneath the shadow of his hat, eyes hidden at first by the tilt of his head as he surveyed the market. The crowd parting around him with the caution given to soldiers who returned with the smell of war still clinging to them. His gaze moved slowly, unhurried, sweeping across faces that turned quickly away, across hands that busied themselves with fruit and cloth, coins that suddenly needed counting, children who were pulled closer, mothers whose eyes dropped to the ground. It was then that he saw the boy, the small shape lying half in shadow, half in the glare of the sun, the bundle of sticks spread around him like a fallen nest. The man's steps did not quicken, but the air seemed to tighten around him as he approached. The soft crunch of his boots on the dirt loud enough that people turned to look, then quickly turned away again, pretending to examine vegetables, to haggle over bread, to be anywhere but here. He stopped beside Malik, standing over the boy for a long moment, the shadow of his body falling across the thin arms, the small hands curled into fists against the dirt. The soldier knelt, the movement precise, controlled, and reached out, his hand resting lightly on Malik's shoulder, the touch firm enough to steady, gentle enough not to startle if the boy woke. His other hand moved to check the pulse at Malik's neck, fingers brushing against the skin, feeling the weak, rapid beat that fluttered there, a sign of life so faint it might have been missed by someone who was not looking for it. "Who is this boy?" the soldier asked, his voice carrying just enough to reach those who stood close, those who watched from behind crates of vegetables, who peeked from behind hanging cloth. No one answered. Eyes dropped, feet shifted. A vendor pretended to count coins, dropping one, bending to pick it up, using the moment to turn away. A mother pulled her child closer, her eyes darting to the soldier before looking past him, focusing on nothing. The soldier's jaw tightened, the faintest shift in the line of his mouth as he looked around, seeing the way the market moved around them, the way the people avoided the sight of a boy collapsed on the ground, the way they stepped carefully around him as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience, a piece of trash left in the road. He repeated the question, louder this time, his voice cutting across the market, silencing a vendor mid-call, making a child's laughter stop abruptly. "How long has he been lying here?" Again, silence. A breeze moved through, lifting the edges of tarps, fluttering the dust in the air, brushing across the boy's hair. The strands lifted gently before settling again. The soldier's eyes swept across the faces around him, the people who looked away, who found something intensely interesting in the ground, in their baskets, in the sky. He shook his head once, a small, sharp movement, before slipping his arm under Malik's back, lifting him with a care that spoke of practiced hands, a familiarity with bodies that could not move themselves. Malik's head lolled against the soldier's shoulder, the boy's lips parting in a soft exhale, a sound so faint it was almost lost to the wind. The soldier adjusted his hold, securing the boy against his chest, the small bundle of bones and dust-light flesh fitting easily into his arms, the boy's head resting against the rough fabric of the soldier's coat. He stood, lifting Malik from the ground, the boy's legs dangling limply, feet covered in the makeshift wraps of torn cloth, the soles dark with dirt and blood. Around them, the market watched, the silence thick and heavy, the weight of it pressing down as the soldier turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd one final time. Behind the glass of a nearby bakery, a woman's face was pale and drawn, her eyes locked on the scene before her before she turned quickly away, disappearing into the shadows of her shop. A group of boys, older than Malik, stared with wide eyes before dropping their gazes, shuffling back, their hands moving to scratch at the backs of their necks, to adjust their collars, to do anything but meet the soldier's eyes. The soldier carried Malik to the truck, the heavy door creaking as it opened, the smell of oil and dust wafting out, the metal warm from the sun. He laid the boy across the seat with a tenderness that did not match the sharpness of his uniform, the authority in his posture, his movements slow as he adjusted the boy's limbs, ensuring his head was turned to the side that his breathing came easier. From a pouch on his belt, he pulled a small canteen, unscrewing the cap with one hand, lifting Malik's head gently to let a few drops of water touch his lips. Malik stirred, a soft sound escaping him, the barest flicker of consciousness as the cool water touched his mouth, his tongue moving weakly to catch the drops, the taste of it pulling him briefly back from the darkness that had wrapped around him. His eyes fluttered, opening for a moment, unfocused, the world a blur of bright light and shifting shapes, before closing again, the exhaustion pulling him back under. The soldier stood, looking down at the boy for a moment, the wind lifting the edge of his coat, revealing the faint glint of a badge pinned to his belt, the symbol of his service catching the light before the fabric fell back into place. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard as he turned back to the market, the silence meeting him like a wall, the people watching with expressions that flickered between shame and fear, discomfort, and something that might have been regret. "You saw a child collapse," the soldier said, his voice low, steady, each word carrying across the space with the weight of something undeniable. "And you watched him lie there." No one moved. No one answered. The wind moved through again, stirring the dust, lifting the edges of tarps, rattling the loose boards of stalls. Without another word, the soldier climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life with a low growl that vibrated through the ground, sending ripples through the puddles of water collected in the ruts of the road. The truck shifted into gear, rolling forward, turning away from the market, leaving behind a square that seemed smaller, quieter, as the people slowly began to move again, the sound returning in cautious murmurs and the soft steps of feet moving away, and the clink of coins passed from hand to hand. But the silence remained in the eyes of those who had seen, who could not unsee, who would remember the sight of a boy lifted from the dust by a man who did not turn away, who would remember the question that had hung in the air unanswered, pressing down on them with a weight heavier than any bundle of wood, a weight that would not leave them even as the market returned to its routine, as the sun moved across the sky, as the world turned once more, carrying the day forward into an evening that would come quietly, leaving the question lingering in the darkness. The road away from the market was long and empty, lined with low, dry grass that whispered against the breeze as the truck rumbled past, its tires stirring up the dust in gentle clouds that settled slowly behind it. The soldier's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale under the grime, eyes fixed on the winding road that led away from the village's quiet judgment and back toward the place he had taken to calling home since returning from service. The air inside the truck was warm, carrying the faint scent of oil, sun-heated metal, and the dust that clung to the boy he had lifted from the dirt. Malik lay stretched across the seat, his head turned to the side, lips dry, hair stuck in small curls to the sweat on his forehead. The bundle of sticks he had gathered was gone, left behind in the market, scattered and trampled underfoot by people who had stepped around him without seeing him, who had moved on with their day as if he were nothing more than a part of the road itself. Now, inside the quiet hum of the truck, his breathing was slow but steady, each breath pulling in the warm air, letting it out with a faint sound that seemed too loud in the hush. The soldier glanced over, his eyes catching on the small, cracked hands resting on Malik's chest, the faint stains of blood and dirt in the lines of his palms, the small, thin wrists that looked impossibly fragile. He remembered another child, years ago, the memory of her face in the glow of a burning building, the way her arms had wrapped around his neck as he carried her out, the way she had coughed against his shoulder, the heat of the fire behind them and the fear that had filled the air like smoke. That child had not survived. The memory clung to him now as he looked at Malik, the guilt that had settled in his bones rising up in the silence between them. The truck rolled to a stop in front of a small, weathered house on the edge of the town, the paint on the door peeling, the windows covered with thin curtains that moved slightly in the breeze. The soldier stepped out, moving around to the passenger side, opening the door carefully, reaching in to lift Malik in his arms once more. The boy stirred faintly, a soft groan slipping from his lips as the movement pulled him from the darkness, his head falling against the soldier's chest, breath warm against the fabric of the uniform. Inside, the house was cool and quiet, the windows letting in the soft light of late afternoon, the air carrying the scent of old wood and the faint tang of soap. The soldier laid Malik on a small cot in the corner of the room, the thin mattress dipping under the boy's weight, the blanket pulled up around him, tucking in the edges with careful hands. Malik's eyes opened briefly, dark and glassy, unfocused as they tried to find something in the room to hold on to before closing again, his body sinking into the thin padding with a sigh. The soldier moved to the small kitchen, filling a cup with water from the clean jug he kept on the counter, the liquid clear and cold, a rarity in a place where water was often a luxury, rationed out in small, precious portions. He returned to the cot, lifting Malik's head gently, pressing the cup to his lips, letting the water touch them, drip into his mouth. The boy's throat moved as he swallowed, a small sound of relief breaking from him, a sound so soft it was almost a whisper, almost a prayer. Malik's eyes opened again, clearer now, blinking against the light as he looked up at the soldier, confusion and fear flickering across his face, his hands clutching at the blanket, pulling it tighter around himself as if it could shield him from the strangeness of this place, from the man standing over him, from the weight of being somewhere unfamiliar. The soldier sat down beside the cot, lowering himself slowly, letting the quiet stretch out, letting the boy see that there was no threat here, that there was only the steady presence of someone who would not leave. In that silence, Malik's breathing steadied, the fear easing slightly as he took in the room around him, the small table with its single chair, the worn floor, the shelf with a few carefully arranged books, a small jar of coins near the window, the curtain shifting gently in the breeze. His eyes returned to the soldier, searching, questioning, but no words came. only the faint tremble of his lips, the small tightening of his fingers around the edge of the blanket. The soldier reached into his pocket, pulling out a small cloth, dipping it in the water before wringing it out, the water dripping back into the cup with soft plinks that echoed in the quiet. He wiped the dirt from Malik's face. The dust streaked across his cheeks, the grime that had settled into the lines of his skin, working carefully around the small cuts and bruises that marked him, the evidence of days spent under the sun, of nights spent in the cold, of a life that had demanded too much of someone so young. Malik's eyes fluttered shut again under the touch, the coolness of the cloth a comfort against the heat of his skin, his breathing slow and steady, his body relaxing against the cot. The soldier set the cloth aside, sitting back, letting the silence return, letting the soft sounds of the world outside fill the space between them, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a bird, the faint creak of the house as it settled in the late afternoon warmth. As the light began to fade, turning the room golden, the soldier moved to the small stove, lighting it with a practiced hand, the small flame catching on the wick, the kettle set on top with water to boil. The scent of the heating metal and the clean water filled the room, mixing with the warm air, creating a pocket of quiet comfort that seemed to hold back the world outside, the world that had ignored the boy lying on the cot, the world that had stepped around him as he lay in the dust. When the water was ready, the soldier poured it carefully into a small tin cup with a handful of rice, letting it simmer until it softened, the scent filling the room, gentle and warm. He let it cool before bringing it to Malik, helping him sit up, supporting his thin frame with one arm as he lifted the cup to the boy's lips, letting him take small sips, the warmth of the rice water easing the tightness in his stomach, the dryness in his throat. Malik's eyes opened briefly, meeting the soldier's, holding there for a moment before looking away, down into the cup, focusing on the warmth between his hands. They stayed like that as the light faded completely, leaving the room lit only by the small lantern on the table, the glow soft and steady, casting gentle shadows that danced on the walls. Malik finished the cup, letting the soldier take it from his hands, sinking back against the pillow, his eyes heavy, the exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. The soldier sat beside him until his breathing evened out, until the small movements of discomfort settled, until the boy was asleep. The blanket pulled around him, the warmth of the room holding him safe. The soldier stood, moving to the window, looking out into the dark, the stars beginning to appear in the sky, the moon rising slowly, casting its pale light across the quiet landscape. He rested his hand on the sill, the cool air brushing against his skin, carrying with it the scents of the night, the dry earth, the faint sweetness of the grass, the distant smoke of cooking fires. His eyes closed for a moment, the memory of another child in another place, the memory of a promise he had not been able to keep, the memory of guilt that had never left him. He opened his eyes, looking back at the boy sleeping on the cot, the small, fragile shape wrapped in the blanket, the quiet breathing that filled the room. The soldier's hand tightened on the sill, the promise forming again, the silent vow that this time he would not walk away, that this time he would not leave, that this time he would not fail. The boy in the dust would not be forgotten. The silence that had surrounded him would be broken. As the night deepened, the soldier sat at the table, writing in a small, worn notebook. The words careful, the lines steady, the pages filling with the record of what had happened, of what had been seen, of what would not be ignored. The lantern burned low, the light soft, the room quiet except for the scratch of the pen, the slow, even breathing of the boy on the cot, the quiet promise that the dawn would come, that when it did, Moloch would not face it alone. Dawn returned to the quiet house with a gentleness that felt like a promise, the pale light seeping through the thin curtains and brushing against the edges of the room, catching on the metal of the lantern left cold on the table, glinting off the rim of the empty tin cup beside it. Moloch's breathing was the first sound of the morning, soft and even, the rise and fall of his chest steady beneath the thin blanket pulled up around his shoulders. His face was turned toward the light, the sleep softening the sharp lines of exhaustion that had carved themselves into his features. The tension in his small hands eased for the first time in days. The soldier sat by the window, watching the dawn come, his eyes following the slow brightening of the world outside, the pale colors spreading across the sky, the quiet promise of warmth that had not yet turned into the harshness of the day's heat. His notebook lay open on the table beside him, the pages filled with careful writing, a record of the boy's collapse, of the silence of the people who had stepped around him, of the truth that pressed heavily against the walls of the small house, demanding to be spoken. As the light grew, Moloch stirred, a small movement beneath the blanket, his eyes opening slowly, blinking against the pale brightness, confusion crossing his face before memory returned, pulling him back into the moment. He turned his head, finding the soldier by the window, the man's posture calm, steady, his presence a quiet promise that the boy was not alone, not now, not anymore. Moloch's lips moved, but no words came, only the faintest shape of gratitude, of fear, of the questions that crowded his mind. The soldier stood, moving quietly across the room, pouring a small cup of water, bringing it to Moloch, helping him sit up, supporting his thin shoulders as he lifted the cup to his lips. Moloch drank slowly, the water cool and clear, washing away the dryness that had clung to his throat, the taste of dust replaced by something clean, something that felt like hope. When the cup was empty, the soldier set it aside, letting Moloch rest back against the pillow, the boy's eyes closing briefly, the exhaustion still heavy in his limbs. Outside, the world was waking, the sounds of footsteps on the dirt roads, the low calls of voices greeting the morning, the soft bray of a donkey tied near a fence, the rustle of wind moving through the dry grass at the edge of town. The soldier listened, the sounds filling the quiet of the house, reminding him of the world beyond these walls, the world that had ignored the boy, that had turned its eyes away, that had let him fall in the dirt and walked past him without stopping. He turned back to Moloch, finding the boy watching him, the dark eyes steady, tired but clear, waiting for something, for the words that would explain why he was here, why he had been lifted from the dust, why this man, a stranger, had not walked away. The soldier knelt beside the cot, letting the silence settle between them for a moment before speaking, his voice low, even, carrying the weight of truth in each word. He told Moloch that he had seen him, that he had watched as people stepped around him, that he had carried him from the place where he had fallen, that he would not leave him, not now, not ever. Moloch's eyes filled with tears that did not fall, the moisture gathering at the edges, shimmering in the morning light before he blinked them away, his hand tightening around the edge of the blanket, clutching it to his chest as if it were the only thing holding him steady. He did not speak, but the tears were enough, the silence enough, the small trembling breath he let out enough to tell the soldier that he understood, that he believed, that he was ready. The soldier stood, moving to the table, picking up his notebook, tucking it into the pocket of his coat before reaching for the small bag he had packed the night before, filled with water, with rice, with the simple medicines he had managed to gather from the nearby town. He glanced back at Malik, giving him a small nod, a promise that he would return, that he would not leave him alone. Malik watched him go, his eyes following the man as he stepped out into the dawn, the door closing softly behind him, the quiet returning to the room. The soldier walked through the town, the early light catching on the windows, the dust of the roads rising softly around his boots as he moved. People were beginning to step out of their houses, pulling water from the pumps, gathering in small groups to speak in low voices, their eyes turning toward him as he passed, their conversations falling silent, the weight of his presence pressing against them, reminding them of what they had seen, of what they had ignored. He reached the market, the place where Malik had fallen, where the dust still bore the faint imprint of the boy's body, where a small piece of wood lay forgotten, kicked to the side, left behind in the rush of the day. The soldier picked it up, turning it over in his hand, feeling the roughness of the bark, the small, sharp edge where it had broken, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. He slipped it into his pocket, a reminder, a symbol of the promise he carried with him. In the center of the market, he stood, his eyes sweeping over the people who gathered, the vendors arranging their goods, the customers moving between the stalls, their eyes avoiding his, their movements careful, cautious, waiting. He pulled the notebook from his pocket, holding it in one hand, lifting it slightly so they could see, so they would understand that he was not here for himself, that he was not here for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried across the market, quiet but clear, each word measured, each sentence landing with the weight of truth that could not be ignored. He told them of the boy they had stepped around, the boy who had collapsed in the dirt while they had turned away, the boy who had been left to the heat and the dust, unseen, unheard, until one man had chosen to see, to lift him, to carry him away from the place where they had left him. He spoke of the promise they had all failed to keep, the promise to see, to care, to protect the children of their town, to protect those who could not protect themselves. He told them that the silence they had chosen was a choice, that the silence they had lived with was not the only way, that they could choose something else, something better, that they could choose to see, to act, to be more than what they had been. The people listened, their eyes on him, the silence of the market deepening as the words settled into them, as the truth pressed against their hearts, as the memory of the boy in the dust returned to them demanding to be faced. Some turned away, unable to meet his gaze, but others held it, their eyes filled with something that looked like regret, like shame, like the beginning of understanding. When he finished speaking, he let the silence settle, let the weight of it hang in the air, let them feel the truth of what had been said. Then he turned, walking back through the market, past the stalls, past the people who moved aside to let him pass, their eyes following him, their conversations starting again in low murmurs that carried the weight of what they had heard. He returned to the small house, opening the door to find Malik sitting up, the blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his eyes on the door, waiting. The soldier stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the quiet of the room settling around them once more. He sat beside the cot, setting the small piece of wood on the table, letting it rest there as a reminder, as a promise. Malik looked at the wood, then at the soldier, his eyes clear, steady, the fear replaced by something else, something stronger, something that looked like hope. The soldier reached out, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart beneath the thin fabric of the blanket. Together, they sat in the quiet of the room, the dawn turning into morning, the morning into day, the world outside moving forward as the town began to wake, the memory of the words spoken in the market lingering in the air, pressing against the silence, breaking it apart, piece by piece. The sun rose with a softer warmth that morning, a quiet promise that the day might carry more than the weight of survival. Malik stood near the door of the small house, the thin blanket still wrapped around his shoulders, watching as the light touched the dust outside, turning it to gold for a moment before it settled back into the familiar brown of the earth he had known so well. His eyes followed the lines of the road that led back toward the town, the road he had walked so many times, dragging the bundle of sticks behind him, feeling the dust rise against his legs, the weight of it pressing down with each step, the silence of the world around him louder than the scrape of the rope against the dirt. Inside the house, the soldier moved quietly, his steps steady, the soft sounds of the morning settling around him as he prepared a small meal, the scent of warm rice and water filling the air, mingling with the breeze that drifted in through the open window. The room was brighter now, the light catching on the edges of the table, the cup that had been washed clean, the small piece of wood that still sat beside the notebook, a reminder of the promise made, of the boy who had been lifted from the dust and carried to a place where he would not be left alone. Malik turned, his eyes finding the soldier as he stepped into the room, holding out the cup of warm rice water, the steam rising gently in the coolness of the morning. The boy's hands shook as he reached for it, but the soldier did not let it spill, guiding it to his lips, letting him drink slowly, the warmth of it easing the tightness in his stomach, the dryness in his throat. Malik's eyes closed as he drank, the taste of it simple, clean, a comfort he had not known in so long that it felt almost like a memory. When the cup was empty, Malik lowered it slowly, his eyes opening to meet the soldier's, the quiet gratitude in them clear, the fear that had once been there replaced now by something softer, something that looked like trust. The soldier gave him a small nod, taking the cup, setting it on the table before returning to sit beside him, letting the silence between them be filled with the sounds of the morning, the birds calling softly from the trees, the breeze moving through the dry grass, the distant sounds of the town beginning to wake. The town was different now, the memory of the soldier's words in the market lingering in the air, pressing into the spaces between conversations, into the glances that people exchanged as they passed each other on the road. The children who once looked away when they saw Malik's thin frame moving past now paused, their eyes following him, questions forming on their lips before being pulled away by parents who no longer looked at the ground when they passed him but instead met his gaze, nodding quietly, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened, of what they had allowed to happen. The soldier stood, moving to the table, picking up the piece of wood, holding it for a moment, feeling its weight before handing it to Malik. The boy took it, turning it over in his hands, feeling the roughness of the bark, the small break where it had snapped, the reminder of the day he had fallen, of the moment when the world had changed, when someone had chosen to stop, to see, to lift him from the dirt and carry him to safety. Malik held the piece of wood against his chest, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the memory of that day settle in him, not as a wound, but as a promise. Together they stepped out into the morning, the soldier's hand resting lightly on Malik's shoulder, guiding him down the steps onto the road that led back toward the town. Malik's steps were slow at first, careful, his legs still weak from the days of hunger and the long hours of carrying the bundle of wood, but with each step the strength returned, the warmth of the sun on his skin a reminder that he was no longer walking alone, that the weight he carried was no longer his alone to bear. As they walked, people stepped aside to let them pass, their eyes on Malik, on the soldier. The silence that had once surrounded the boy replaced now by the quiet murmur of voices, by the soft greetings of neighbors who had once turned away, by the small, hesitant smiles of children who watched him with wide eyes, their curiosity no longer hidden behind fear or shame. The market came into view, the stalls already busy with the sounds of the day, the vendors calling out their prices, the clink of coins passing from hand to hand, the air filled with the scent of warm bread and fresh fruit, with the warmth of a day that felt new. They stopped at the edge of the market, Malik's eyes sweeping over the place where he had once fallen, where the dust had settled around him as people stepped around him, where he had lain with the bundle of sticks scattered like broken bones, where he had believed that the world would leave him there forever. Now the ground was clean, the dust brushed away, the space open and clear, a small sign placed at the edge of the stall, a simple piece of wood with words painted in careful letters. "We see you." The soldier's hand tightened on Malik's shoulder, guiding him forward into the market, past the stalls where people nodded, where a woman handed him a small piece of bread without asking for payment, where a man stepped aside to let him pass, tipping his hat in quiet respect. Malik held the piece of wood close to his chest, his eyes bright in the morning light, the weight of the past still with him, but no longer heavy in the same way, no longer something he carried alone. They moved through the market, reaching the center where a small platform had been built, where people gathered, waiting, their eyes turning toward Malik as he stepped forward, the soldier beside him, the quiet of the morning settling over them as they waited for him to speak. Malik's hands tightened around the piece of wood, his breath catching in his throat as he looked out at the faces watching him, the faces that had once looked away, the faces that now waited, listening. He took a breath, lifting his head, his voice quiet but clear as he spoke, telling them of the days he had walked the roads with the bundle of wood, of the days he had pulled it through the dust, of the days he had stood in the market, waiting for someone to see him, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for someone to care. He told them of the moment he had fallen, of the silence that had surrounded him, of the way the world had moved on around him, of the way the soldier had lifted him from the dust, of the way he had been carried to safety, of the promise that had been made. As he spoke, the people listened, the quiet of the market deepening, the sounds of the day pausing for a moment as the truth settled into them, pressing into the spaces between them, into the memories they carried, into the promise of what they could become. Malik's voice did not shake as he spoke, did not falter as he told them that the world did not have to be silent, that they did not have to look away, that they could choose to see, to care, to lift those who fell, to carry the weight together. When he finished, the silence held for a moment, the world pausing as the morning light settled over the market, as the breeze moved through, lifting the edges of the tarps, stirring the scent of bread and fruit, carrying the promise of the day forward. Then, quietly, someone began to clap, the sound soft at first, then growing, spreading through the market as hands came together, as voices rose, as the people who had once looked away lifted their heads, their eyes meeting Malik's, their hands clapping, their voices joining, the silence broken. Malik stood on the platform, the piece of wood held against his chest, the warmth of the morning on his skin, the light of the day bright around him, the sound of the town rising in the air, the promise of what could be carried in each breath, in each step, in each hand that reached out to lift, to carry, to walk beside those who had once been left behind. Beside him, the soldier stood, his hand resting on Malik's shoulder, his eyes on the boy who had once been alone, who had once been silent, who now stood in the light, seen, heard, lifted, no longer alone, no longer invisible, no longer carrying the weight alone. And as the sun rose higher, warming the earth, the town that had once turned away turned toward the light, the people stepping forward, carrying the promise with them, the road ahead bright, the dust lifting in the breeze, the silence broken forever. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe for more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and check out the next video.